Good afternoon. Welcome to the Department of Medicine's Grand Rounds. My name is Jonathan Na. I'm one of the internal medicine chief residents, and thank you all for joining us today. Next week's Grand Rounds will be all virtual. Will be the Jack Lassar lectureship titled "Current State of Irritable Bowel Syndrome Management" by Dr. Lynn from the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. We hope that you will join us then. Today is the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research at Medical Grand Rounds, titled "Innovative Strategies for Navigating Machine Learning, Artificial Intelligence, Ready Digitized Medical Health Data," and will be presented by Dr. Lynn, Associate Professor of Epidemiology and Public Health at the Institute of Genome Sciences at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. She received her doctorate of philosophy at the University of Ottawa and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Cancer Institute. She at Frederick Cancer Research Center and Development at Frederick, Maryland. Her current research focuses on developing bioinformatic tools, metadata standards, and ontologies to gain a broader understanding of the relationship between infectious pathogens, their genomic sequence, and diseases. She serves as a lead on multiple projects, including as a member of the Population Science Program within the University of Maryland Marlene and Stuart Greenwald Comprehensive Cancer Center Program in Oncology, as a PI of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation funded Built Environment, apologies if I mispronounced, MLX5BE metadata project, and the PI of the Human Disease Ontology. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Schriml.
I want to thank you for inviting us today and getting to talk to you about big data. We absolutely love big data, being a genomics institute, and we have a lot of lessons learned and challenges we've faced over the years that are really pertinent for looking at electronic health data. So I want you to walk with me and think about the challenges, think about the strategies involved. And I'm going to walk through a number of examples and give you some other ideas of things that we have worked with over the years. As was mentioned in the introduction, I'm the PI for the Human Disease Ontology Project. This is a genomic resource for NIH, and I'll go further into that resource and how we handle that type of data. I know we have learning objectives for today, and I'm going to use these a little bit as an outline for the talk. We're going to talk about the role of ontologies. Now, ontologies really are standardized tools and measures to be able to connect data. Think of it as your grocery list. You're at the grocery store. There's different departments in the grocery store, right? So think about you want to look at produce. You have grapes, cucumbers, olives, apples. Those are all produce. So maybe you're looking over in the dairy section for milk, eggs, cheese. These are all part of a grocery store, but they also have properties or features that describe them as part of that department. Think of an ontology that way. It's a way to categorize data, but also to look at data and its similar properties to link it. We use ontologies in a wide variety of ways, and I'll go through a number of examples to illustrate this. But really, ontologies are a tool that allow us to get more a handle on the data, for it to be more standardized, so that we can do that machine learning, we can do that AI analysis, because really, to get to machine learning data, you have to have very clean data, very standardized data, and this is a nice tool to do it. So we'll talk about how data can be interconnected through ontologies, and then we'll get to how ontologies can be applied to machine learning and AI. I'll be giving you some examples from my work. First, I want to talk about some of the challenges, the pure data, the amount of data that's coming in. Just as we faced with the Genome project starting in the early 2000s and coming in the last 20 years, it's this astounding amount of information. You really have to think about it in a new way, how we're going to grapple with it. This is just a search this last week, case reports from PubMed. I'm always looking at these, looking at new diseases that are coming up, but just the volume of data is astounding. So I'm going to talk about some strategies for handling that volume of data and also tackling the different data types. As you look at the right side of the slide, you're seeing just some examples of the diversity of data in electronic health records. This can be quite daunting. It's a lot of data, a lot of very diverse data. But I'm going to walk you through some of the strategies we've done and we've undertaken over the years for different projects to handle very diverse data types like this and get a handle on them and to be able to do inferencing through them. Another challenge to start with is thinking about how we're mapping that data for different diagnostic systems, for different coding systems. Now, again, working in a hospital, we have ICD codes, right? We got it for billing, for morbidity and mortality reports, but even the ICD codes, They have different versions that come out every number of years. How do we map across? This is a challenge in data. If you had a data set that's mapped to ICD-9 and now ICD-11, how do you connect the two? And this, again, is a role that ontologies can play to connect that information. Additionally, you may have other ontologies you pull. They may be looking at genetic diseases in OMIM, the online Mendelian inheritance map. Again, you want to connect that information. And so ontologies, again, have a role to connect this information, because as much as we would love for people to code data in all one of these systems, no one will ever do that. That's certainly what we found over the years. So we have come across strategies, we've devised new solutions so they can do exactly that. No matter which of the various vocabularies are out there, we can map between them. And I'll show you how we've been doing that. I want you to look at this figure and think about how we would scale up. Think about walking up the hill. How do we get from the very beginning, where we're looking at digital health data, capturing that information? How do we get it to be not just data, but information, connected information? How do we standardize that structure? And that's really what I'll talk about for the most part for ontologies. But thinking as you move up this hill, think about how you get to knowledge. How do you find relationships between different types of data? So I collect a lot of disease data, but a lot of things that are associated with disease. How do we also connect those so that they make sense? We can inference them. You're not just going to ever have one disease, one data type. So again, thinking about how they're different, how we connect them, how do we make sense of them? And then really getting to insights. That's where we're going to get to the machine learning and the AI. And that is really the sweet spot we all want to get to. But I think a really good lesson learned that we have come across, many of us in the last number of years, is to have machine learning and AI, we have to have data that's clean, we have data that's standardized, and we need a human component, because you can have these great data sets that are being run through AI, but they have to be tested against golden standard data sets that are vetted by someone. So again, there's still an interaction between human and machine, but again, the AI is a great potential to get us to all these amazing discoveries. We just have to get ourselves there. Now, I'm building on these last two parts of that hill. I really just wanted to mention a little bit more about what was the difference between a knowledge base. A knowledge base is that connectivity between those data types. Because you're collecting data in EHR, you want to know about the gender, the socioeconomic information, their medical history, all sorts of things you want to pull together. That's knowledge base, pulling those things together. And ontologies, as I said, I would mention, have a lot of roles. Not just in standardizing a particular area, but in representing what's coming through literature. As you know, tens of thousands of articles are published daily. So you want to be able to have a way to mine that information, bring it together. And one thing I find interestingly through disease is nomenclature changes so much over time. Some diseases, thankfully, don't change, but many diseases, it can be controversial, it can change, there's new information. So again, an ontology has that role to pull that information in and capture it in a rigorous way. And then I talked about at the bottom of the slide, all the things that ontologies can enable, facilitate, and enable aggregation of data as well. Now, I just want to introduce you a little bit to what my project is, a human disease ontology. As I was mentioning, we have been funded for years from NIH. We are considered a genomic resource and a knowledge base. What that means is our job is to represent human disease knowledge, but to provide it as a resource out to the biomedical and clinical community wherever it's needed. We work with literally hundreds of other resources so they can have standardized data. As new literature comes in, we're working as a team to integrate that new information and then distribute it back out. This is actually our 20th year of the ontology as a resource. Yeah, it was actually nice to kind of like all say, oh yeah, 20 years, wow, okay. Yeah, yeah, it's a nice milestone for us. But what it means is we've grown a lot in those years. We've learned how to not just collect data from a few articles, but how to aggregate it across resources, how to utilize the information in the resources to then further improve that ontology, and then that gets distributed out to other researchers. So it's very much a network of a team putting that together. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go forward. I gave you a sneak peek. Okay, so I'll move forward now, but just wanted to let you know we were highly cited, used around the world. We have a website if you want to check us out, and our nucleic acid research paper is listed there, and it's on our website, which you can see on our website from the QR code. But now I'll give you that sneak peek. Okay, so one of the roles we have is part of this work is to always be thinking where is knowledge evolving. And this, what I'm showing you here is the results of one of my ongoing collaborations with two cancer-related resources, Civic, and ClinGen. So working at the genetic basis of cancer. As you know, the WHO has blue books are republished every so often for different topic areas, for parts of the body. One of the things we're doing is going through them. As that knowledge is changing, new nomenclature, new diseases are brought in into knowing, not just from publications, but through consideration through the WHO. We look at how we classified it before, how does the nomenclature change, and then how do we bring that in together. One thing to keep in mind though, just because you have a new name for a disease doesn't mean that old name isn't present in someone's database, isn't present in someone's record. So that's something you have to always kind of pull through the system. You can't just always replace them. You have to think about the timeline, because again, it isn't static information. It's very much that dynamic situation. And certainly that's something I've learned working with text mining and machine learning communities in the last 10 years, is having that timeline. Thinking about not the data that they're just pulling out of literature today, but what is it, what's the progression of it, what's the progression of the information. So going from our reclassification, then looking at, again, how is the disease ontology as a project itself different from others? And I put this up, I do actually get this question when I'm, like I was at NIH last week, the Rare Disease Day. How is it different? There's a lot of vocabularies out there. So we were purpose built so that we could have this machine readable file and human, but as well as a human readable file to have these relationships between diseases. So it's great to know, have definitions for a disease or to know its synonyms, but I would really like, what I really want to show and know is how are diseases related to one another. So we started very simply looking at diseases. I'll take you back 2 slides. And you can see we have a hierarchy that we represent them in. So we built an etiology-based hierarchy to represent disease. So based on cause, where we know cause. In some cases, obviously like syndromes or other diseases of anatomy, we don't know cause, but when we do, we can update the classification. And the reason we want this etiology-based system is we want to get further insights into what is going on with diseases. How do you relate diseases that have a similar cause? And I'll show you how I've been building on this. But really, it's bringing it from collecting the data about a particular disease to understanding its etiology, but then understanding how it is related to other diseases through its various features and that I'll describe, including phenotypes, things like that. And we do add about 700 or so new diseases every year. We curate every one, we research them, and add that information in. In addition to looking at diseases from a perspective of anatomy, which makes sense clinically, we want to know where things are in the body. That was one of the first areas we made sure we went through all of disease terms and identified where they occur in the body when we could. We went to then think about what are the other types of information about disease we could incorporate. And here you're seeing a list of them in the middle of the slide. But what this also shows you is that we standardize each of these pieces of information. So the anatomy terms, the cell terms, phenotypes, they all come from other ontologies that structure that information. So we link to them so that when we're describing the phenotypes between 10 different diseases, it's coming from a structured place and then can be inferenced over. Again, for machine learning, building that model up. And what I'm showing you on the right side of the slide is when we wanted to, in the last number of years, look at mechanisms, not just features of a disease, like phenotypes and symptoms, those are all great, but mechanisms. I want to understand what's going on, really more deeply. So we're looking at environmental and genetic drivers of disease, and that's work that we're doing right now. I want to show you one example of how we think of disease in a graphical format. So I showed you that list, but really it's a big graph, how things are connected. And what it allows us to do for this COVID-19 example is bring in that other related information I had on the last slide. So for every disease, when we know it, and obviously we don't know it for every disease, every item that we're looking for, but when we know it, like we know symptoms or phenotypes or how something is transmitted, we can add it in a rigorous way. Again, this allows you then to say, well, what diseases are transmitted in this method or this type of process, direct droplet spread, or from fomites in a room. So you can ask those questions and then you can ask further questions about that disease information. That's really what we've been trying to build as a model over the years. This is the point we're at now. You can do this kind of inferencing. And I also wanted to describe just a little bit what it means to develop a standard over 20 years, what the kind of process is like, because and you're capturing or trying to capture a new type of data, you kind of go through the similar stages. You really want to think about strategic partnerships. You want to think about changes you're going to integrate. How are you going to have data that is connectable and findable over many years? How are you putting that information out to your community so they have input? This is any project like this is a community project. I get contacted almost nearly daily from someone who has a different idea or different research area. I think I'm talking to someone about PTSD next week. I was just talking to rare diseases last week. So again, it's always a very active area, but it has to kind of go through this circular flow and evolve with the community. I think to really be a community resource. And that's what we've evolved to be over the last 20 years. Now, the reason I talk about FAIR data is that comes out quite a lot out of NIH, but again, thinking about how are we making the data we are all representing and capturing, how are we making it findable by other resources. And this is thinking from not just querying on some website, but how are you finding it through the web doing queries? How are you downloading data sets? So again, I have to be very thoughtful on any large data set that we're putting together. How do we fulfill these opportunities to get data out there and to make it reusable, to make it interoperable? So again, it helps us alliterate some of these things, but to think about how we can do a better job and continue to make it more available to the community. Now, the next part of the slides I want to share with you what we've been doing the last couple of years. This is my clinician team here at the School of Medicine, my colleagues on the grant, and then Case Western, because Cynthia Bear, she's on the Case Western now. She was here before. Anyway, so the clinician team, we work hand in hand to really think about how are we classifying diseases. We're questioning always, how can we do better? How can we have better representation? Always being grounded in the clinical domain. What I'll show you on the right-hand side of the slide is our figure from our recent paper where we have remodeled what is a complex disease and what are all the various factors out there we want to try and capture or should be capturing in order to understand it. In the first number of years, we're working together, looked at monogenic diseases, physical disorders, syndromes, but we want to really tackle a little more complex things where there's environmental factors, where there's genetic factors, or where it's really gray in the middle. Maybe there's a genetic factor we don't know about, or it's a bit of a hint that there's a risk factor. So all of that spectrum is really what we're trying to capture with this work, and this is ongoing, and this is guiding really how we are, again, rethinking how do we represent disease, how do we represent this complexity of disease. And as you can see, they're from various departments here at the school. Again, just thinking about a little bit about our thought process for putting this big model together is, really realizing this is such a spectrum of diseases, and there's a lot of gray area in the very middle where we have maybe one gene involved, maybe you have a modifier gene involved, and really trying to figure out how we can best capture that information in a systematic way. So again, making that available for further review. It's really a spectrum that I think we're bringing together. And so the table from the paper here, bless you. Again, we wanted to deliver examples because we're communicating this through our paper out to the community to think about disease in a different way. Going well beyond just monogenic diseases. Again, think about, well, where do we have these other components involved? So we picked out some classic examples to get people thinking. How do we address disease? How do we recapture that information? So if we're looking at, again, our goal is thinking about differential diagnosis. How do we ask those questions, but with the knowledge of this complexity? Two reclassifications that are part of this work. So I will tell you about next. So we developed this complex disease model, thinking about all the factors involved, and then we wanted to test it. We wanted to see for asthma and diabetes, which I'll show you next, thinking about what is the knowledge that's been in literature, how we previously classified it, and how can we test our model with this particular reclassification. Are the various factors that are involved in different types of asthma, are they in the model? Do we need to expand in the model? So we want to question ourselves. So what I'm showing you here on the left to the right is how we represented asthma before we did this work. And it took about 2 years to do this work, really to dive deep, to think about it, how we reclassify it, bring all these new and different types of information in. How do we bring in the different types of allergens for the allergic asthma, looking at environmental drivers? How do we look at pathophysiological endotypes? That's at the very bottom on the right side. These, again, a different way beyond phenotypes of thinking about complex disease. Another one I want to bring in and show you about is the diabetes mellitus. So again, we're rethinking about how are we classifying it, bringing all the most the most up-to-date literature, I guess would be the best way to put it. Yeah, how we're bringing that literature in, but all the considerations from the clinical perspective on how we should be capturing it. So it's making the most sense that we are sharing that representation of the characteristics of different subtypes of diabetes through the ontology itself. I'm next going to talk a little bit about how we interconnect data as a project, but I have this slide up. I really want to think, have you think about how we're linking data through, in my case, disease, but how you're linking data through any of these key data types, phenotypes, anatomy, disease. How we, it's really one touch in the other, allowing all sorts of very different types of resources. You'll see a product there. That's a xenopus modelers and database. So they do genetic models of human disease. How do you connect that with the other side of this slide with UniProt? So there's proteins, right? So again, think about what are the connectors between these very different types of data, different systems, so that you can have this data integration. You can ask the bigger questions. And here I'm just showing you the different types of data that we connect with, thinking about all, and I am only showing you obviously a snapshot of the 350 or so resources we work with, but again, pulling out the various different types of data, how centralizing a particular ontology can be to connect them. The different types of information, even though you may not think that biomarkers or various alleles or pathway data, no connectivity in a particular database, but by linking them through this stream of information and ontology, you again have this opportunity to connect all sorts of types of data. And yes, this didn't happen in one day or 1 year. This is 20 years of work, very active collaborations. But again, continuing to build on the different types of data are out there and seeing how we can, again, as a resource, build the community and help them connect their data. I want to give you some very specific examples, a couple of them here, of how our project is used for what they're doing with it, not just naming the resources, but really, if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, so we work with quite a number of machine learning and AI developers, and I just put one example here, Dynaccurate. Often we are working with them when they have a data set that they want to test. One of the more recent works is we had orphanet rare diseases, and they want to connect that with MESH, which is the medical subject headings you get from PubMed articles. How do you connect the two? So they do machine learning on it first, get an idea of what the connections are, but then our goal is to help them with that gold standard data set and to vet the results that they have. So I think it's an interesting lesson here is that it is a give and take between clinical expertise and reviewing the data and then letting the machines run, but letting them run on I think, very purposeful knowledge so that we can get some really interesting results out of it. And the other ones I'm showing you here are clinical knowledge bases. This is Jackson Labs, clinical variant knowledge base. And they use a disease ontology. There's a figure from them there. But again, they have pathology reports. They have reports coming from the molecular variants. So they have clinicians writing those pathology reports. And what they did is they made sure that diseases and other data types are the same at both ends of that pipeline. So when they get the end result, they are talking about the same bit of information, same disease. They also use the ontology to look at their data in a hierarchical fashion. So we produce files for them that are just the cancers that they're interested in, so they can walk up and down related carcinomas or other diseases and see whether data is represented at a very specific type of carcinoma or a higher level term, and they can see that that is related to each other when they're doing their queries. And the last is just numerous types of resource developers have all sorts, and I've given you a number of examples of how they're using it. But again, they ask questions of the data. They want to be able to represent it in a particular way. A lot of network visualization tools have been produced, not just on this ontology, but on many others. Again, letting you look at the data connectivity between them. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of examples of groups that I collaborate with. This is our very own Owen White from the Institute for Genome Sciences. We worked together for 17, 18 years now, since I joined the team. Yeah. So this project in particular, I worked with Owen on, and this is a data portal that was the intent of it is to connect data across numerous projects, and they're on the right side of the slide, that are funded by the Common Fund at NIH. So as you can well imagine, each of those resources developed for its own purpose, figured out its own standards, representing data on their own data site. So what this project was trying to do is connect them, but not ask them to change anything, but literally making a way to connect to them as the data, through the data, so queries can be made across them. And that's really what the outcome of this project has been. And if you look on the left side, you can see the different types of data that are represented now. And I'll show you, disease for me, but what are the different types of data that are then allowing you to connect this data. So this is very much a data aggregation project. But it's again, working with lots of people, bless you, to again, making that data more fair, making it findable, reusable, be able to query through all sorts of data. Now, thinking about these sets of slides when I was thinking about the Common Fund project, I'm taking back to 2017, we're putting together these kinds of tables. When Owen and I came up with the idea of this metadata cipher. So on the far right side of the slide, you can see all sorts, there's a listing there of all different types of vocabularies and standards. At the top of it is 5 different ways that people were annotating their diseases, different resources, which I said earlier could happen, and it obviously does. So what we did is we looked at the various resources in the table in the middle and asked ourselves first, what are they using? What is the different systems they're using? Then how can we take those systems and connect them across? So it's really one of the first steps is massive aggregation projects. It's figuring out how we can connect them. And then after that, it's mapping that data to a particular standard. So all those disease terms are now mapped to the disease ontology. So you can do things like this. So when you're on that website, you can ask these kinds of queries. You can use these standardized identifiers. The ones I'm showing you here are from our ontology. But one of the sweet things about ontologies is these identifiers are persistent over time. They don't go anywhere. They're easily queryable. I can link data through them. So it's a nice system in that way. People have tried to use just a text-based system to do matching, but it's problematic. Even case-sensitive things or hyphens can mess up that kind of query system, so it's a more rigorous way to use identifiers. And then you can get outputs of data, as I'm showing you just briefly at the bottom of the different information. I was just listing here some of the diseases they have. They have 1,900 or so in there. But one thing I wanted to show you though, beyond that is how do they represent data in an aggregated form? What kind of questions? This is more getting to the inferencing of what you can do. And this is again the same website. It allows you to explore and search for data. We call this faceted data searching. The facets are things like phenotypes, diseases, anatomy. It's the types of data. Again, like a grocery store list I talked about. This is the produce section. This is the dairy section, thinking of that kind of level. So what this allows you to do is really slice and dice your data in ways it was never initially put together as. So you can ask all sorts of questions about it. And I've shown in the bottom slide the different things this particular site at this time is allowing you to look at. So disease, ethnicity, race, species, sex, all sorts of things. But one thing I also like, I want to show you a different view. In this case, if you want to understand where do you have representation parts of your data set, say in this case for sex, and where is that representation not there? Where do you have data sets that are collected that maybe are biased either ethnically or gender or socioeconomic? Where can you see that variation in your data? And this kind of highlights it. So then you can say, well, maybe I need to do more studies in this area. Or at least I know where the bias may be in my data by looking at it from these various perspectives. That's the one thing I really like about this, thinking about where could bias be and where could we potentially address this DEI. Now, just a couple other examples. I mentioned earlier the frog that was on that earlier slide, the Xenophus, right? So the model version database, these are research have been going for over 25 years. I work with the breadth of them. One reason I'm showing you this slide is to think about if you have aggregated data from studies from maybe 20 hospitals, thinking about bringing the EHR data in. This is a very similar idea what happened here. All these resources were developed independently, completely autonomously from one another, different systems, different ontologies, different records. In the last 5 years, they've come together through different key data types and saying, we can connect Xenophus and mouse genes and their variants by picking key features or types of data, phenotypes, and anatomy, disease. Again, another way of having a perspective of what's our knowledge in that breadth of information by picking out what's going to connect them across. They do use a large variety of ontologies. I've just showed some on the side. So anatomy is a key one. Obviously, Asuka's ontology is one I've not shown you before. We use it as well. It allows you to look at what are the types of features of the types of variants. So monosomy, trisomy, uniparental, disomy, those kinds of things. You can really kind of get into that aspect of the inheritance and the variants. Now, this next couple of examples really thinking about how ontologies apply to electronic health records. And these are not two projects that I'm involved in at all, but I think they give you a view of how even disease could be handled in very different ways. Yeah, on our own campus, we use Trainetics, right? Yeah. So they're looking at how do we select these therapeutic areas and how many diseases been in those areas. So that makes sense. But then if you think of another resource, it's this is the CDISC. They again are thinking of very therapeutic areas, yes, but with a little different point of view, having those diseases underneath them. And I was talking to the rare disease community last week. They're using a similar idea to connect specialists, so cardiovascular disease, and then cardiovascular specialists. So they're again using these biddings that we all know and love in clinical work. But again, thinking about these therapeutic areas to get them to specialists. So it's again just another way of kind of organizing your data. This isn't an ontology, but think of this as more of a, I guess, a controlled vocabulary or a listing, but it helps us get a better handle on the data. Now, a couple of electronic health record related projects that I've been involved in. I was contacted almost 2 years ago, colleagues in India. They want to, this is this slide showing in a recent publication. They want to get the information about to the point of care for diagnosis, to give that information to the very rural setting, many rural settings that they're dealing with in their system. So they developed an AI system, and I came in as a consultant to help with how would you standardize the data for not just diseases, but for symptoms. Again, a different point of view, but using AI technology to then say, where can we find connections between the data that's out there so that we can give hopefully pointers to people that need that information. They don't have to go look it up. But again, it's using many knowledge bases here that I've listed to again bring that information together. I'll just show you an example of that. In the paper, we have a schema. Again, this is very, you'll see this again and again, and actually twice more on my slides. But different schemas that groups who are doing machine learning or AI, it's always the same sort of steps though, you'll notice. There's always the triaging, figuring out the types of data, just like we did with the Common Fund project. How do we standardize those types? And then when can we do all the cool inferencing? That's really the sweet part we all want to get to. But again, it's a pathway to get to that point. And then asking all sorts of questions that you can of that data. And actually, they even have it in 2 languages at this point. But again, it's a process to get through. And I think the figures that are put out in the various papers really help us illustrate how we get through those steps. And this is the website from that particular project. Again, from this one from a symptom perspective instead of a disease perspective. So searching on, give me, you can list any set of symptoms, and that comes from another ontology. Actually, I run the symptom ontology. But again, a standardized set of terms that you're all familiar with, and then tell me which diseases have those. It's an and type of query. So it is a start. I think this resource certainly is going to grow in its ability and knowledge. But again, it's another way to start mining the data to get questions out. So yeah, once you have it all in and it's standardized, all sorts of things you can ask, which is sweet, right? It's a really nice spot to be in. So just 2 more. This is actually a resource I'm not involved with, but they do cite us. I actually came across it in all things Twitter. But it's nice to know who's using you and how they're using you. So they're looking at the UK Biobank. So that's really quite a large, massive data set. And what they want to do is think about where can we take that phenotype information kind of to a next level? Where can we use it on a more population level to start looking at inferencing about phenotypes for patients? So again, really taking it down that path. And again, I wanted to show you this figure, really how they're conceiving how to connect that data through the system, yeah, on a very large scale. So I thought that was kind of interesting for what we're thinking about today. And if anyone wants my slides, by the way, afterwards, I'm happy to share them, and all the links are in there as well. This is just one more. It's the last one of this series. So this is actually a PhD student who contacted me, and I have been talking for the last 2 weeks. It was very timely for when I was preparing this seminar. Again, thinking about, and they are using us, but the reason I wanted to include them here is they're building what often happens in this field is they're building a resource to give away. Very much the same as the disease ontology. We built it to give it away. We want pharma to use it, which they are. We want people that I don't ever talk to use it, which is fantastic. And resources like this, and I put all the links in here where this is available. They're again building systems that can be taken advantage of or reused, to do the very similar work that we may be interested in doing. Again, looking at the diversity of types of data, but I think this slide really shows nicely they're going beyond annotating on that first top level of the figure to how they're doing the quality control. And I think it's a really important step to think about because data comes in so many ways. That can be even just British spellings and US English spellings can get you to not be able to have data to be connected. Things, very simple things like that. So these kind of systems build in those rules. And as you look at your data and you learn a little bit more about it, then you can have more quality control. Maybe even case could be an issue. Think of all the proper name diseases that are proper nouns, uppercase. And if you have a machine that didn't have case and sensitivity, they wouldn't connect, right? Even all the diversity of names, how they're named over the various years, we want to have that connectivity in here. So again, this is really walking you through getting to the very bottom where you're looking at causal inference. And that's really where we all want to get to. But I do want to mention this one because I think it's, again, another example of tools being built for other groups, but potentially very useful for additional analysis. And the very last one is a collaboration that I've been working on for the last couple of years. This is my colleague at the University of Kentucky, Melissa Clarkson. So this gets you to think about, when we talk about data as text or as numbers or as identifiers, what Melissa has been doing for years is doing it as a graphical view. So we're building a prototype right now to think about disease from the anatomical view, the graphical anatomical. So that being able for patients or users of the site to be able to explore disease through a graphical interface, thinking about how things are connected also through a graphical means. So again, it's a very different way that I don't see a lot of other groups necessarily doing for electronic health data. But again, thinking about the possibilities. And that's all, we all train on anatomy, right? We love anatomy. Yeah. It is our bread and butter. It is. And so again, thinking about it in a different way, thinking about how we could maybe utilize different resources out there. And so, yeah, we actually have a grant in, just went through council review. So fingers crossed for our second, set of funding. So it's just exciting that there's other opportunities or other ways for us to connect that data. And that is my last slide. And again, I just wanted to bring you back to my team, the clinical team here at the School of Medicine, my informatics team at the Institute for Genome Sciences. And I'm giving you, there it goes, okay. And I'm giving you just a couple hints in the middle of that slide of things we're working on right now. So the clinical team will be starting to kick off a nosology program for trainees and residents across the campus. It'll be open to anyone who's interested in joining us to learn more about disease and nomenclature. And then actually, since Cynthia Bear, she's leading up our disease exposome project. So we're looking at known exposures, environmental exposures, and their outcomes. So that's things you'll be seeing coming up in the next couple of years. And that's it. And thank you very much.
So if anyone here has questions, I'm happy to run the mic up. But otherwise, I'm going to check the chat, see if there's any question answers. And if there's anyone online, you can also type into the Q&A and we can see your questions.
And you can always contact me. I'm just across the street at IGS. So.
Oh, we have something. I would have to echo that sentiment. Unless the whirlwind of information and accent being presented.
I'm happy to always chat with others if they want to talk about integrating data or projects that we can help in. We do a lot of consulting work where we just really help others figure out what to do with their data or how to handle it.
Well, thank you. A really wonderful presentation. So, disease ontologies are often described as a goal at the end of a particular rainbow. It's very difficult to achieve. So could you sort of share with us, what have been the problems and how you think that we're going to be able to overcome these for general use?
For ontology for general use, yeah, it is an evolution. So when projects start, and we started with the colleagues at the University of Chicago, really trying to understand how we would capture that knowledge. And I think the biggest challenge is figuring out what's the diversity of knowledge in your community. So for diseases, it is very complex. Cancers are classified very differently than metabolic diseases. So that was one of the early challenges I would say we tackled back by 2010. We mined the information and literature, but we actually reached out to all sorts of communities and make sure their expertise guided us. So that is one of the challenges. But we've thankfully in 20 years, we've kind of surpassed all that. And we've gotten to a point where we are, we're utilized by all sorts of groups we don't know about, which is always lovely. But again, we've gotten to where maintaining the data and updating the data no longer is a challenge. We use machine learning actually to identify when new papers come into literature or when a database updates. And so that was always a bottleneck for us, for a number of people to handle it, and that no longer is.
So how can we help with the implementation of the widespread use of ontology?
Yeah, I think each researcher can definitely help with the implementation of ontologies. When you have a project, thinking about how you standardize the data, no matter what type of data you have, and looking out there, because I would say for the most part, any type of data you have has been standardized by someone, or there's a team that you can contribute to. I think that is another fantastic way that I work with lots of clinicians that do exactly that. They'll have an area of expertise, they'll find an ontology that maybe doesn't have every term they want, or maybe it needs a revision, and they team up. That's really one of the best ways for people to, I think, to contribute.
Excellent. I think the question did pop up in the chat. A couple questions now. First question, any concern about plagiarism when using AI platforms like ChatGPT to analyze data? Many journals are against using it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I can imagine that journals may not be so thrilled when all sorts of data is pulled out of their licensed information. Yeah, again, I think people in the AI community say, once it's public domain, it's public domain. There is that. And so I think it's very hard once you break down that data out of an article and you're taking pieces of it to have the same licensing attached. We run into the same issue in this. So another part of my work is genomics and large scale sequencing genomics. So we run into this with large scale projects, but once it's in the public domain, people can reuse it as they wish. And I think it's exactly what the AI and machine learning people are doing. They are mining what they can find. If you put it out there, they're going to use it.
Excellent. I think this next question is also a little bit similar. How does GPT-3, in addition to AI such as machine learning, leverage or interface with disease ontology?
Yeah, I have to go check ChatGPT. I haven't looked at them released recently. The way other machine learning AI groups interface us, they are often doing an analysis and they want expertise to know what are the right or wrong calls that they're connecting through their analysis. And so we'll go through their true positives, true negatives, and giving that feedback. And then we also provide data sets. So one of the groups needed OrphaNet or needed mesh in a text-based file so you can get all the identifiers. And we produce those reports as part of our repository. We have what's called the GitHub repository. It's an open resource. That's where we put all of our data files. And people ask for different versions of them all the time. We had a cancer and anatomy one from a hospital in Israel the other day. They want to have just that data set for every cancer, what's its known anatomy site. So we produce the files and then share them out. Great questions, everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay, so last call for questions, but Dr. Schriml, this was an excellent talk. I know this is a space that I'm still learning a lot about. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Did I just pull it out or did I think?